Hey everyone, Pugs here, and I'm back with yet another big ol' season review. This time around, I'll be talking about Season 7 of SpongeBob SquarePants, which we zipped through surprisingly fast. Returning viewers, y'all already know what's about to go down, so you don't quite need the coming explanation and are fine to skip over to the next timestamp. Although you would miss the big thank you. If this is your first time watching one of my season overviews, please stick around for another minute so I can explain to you just what this is all about. As you're probably aware of, this video is my review of the entirety of Season 7 of The Sponge Show. Once this introduction is done and over with, I'm going to be putting all of the episodes in this season in a tier list, discussing them all as I go, and I'll specifically highlight my top 5 and bottom 5 of the season. Once that's done, I'll talk about the average episode rating score for this season, and then I'll have a lengthy discussion of Season 7 as a whole. Like I always do, I just want to highlight my rating system for a moment. I mean, you've been hearing me rate episodes for a while now, so even if you've never seen me explain the tier list before, you've probably got a good idea of what the tiers mean, but I just wanted to lay them all out for you. If you want a detailed explanation, go check out my very first season overview where I went over Season 1. Like always, that's in the description for you. And that's it. Or, well, almost it. I'd be remiss if I didn't say my big, huge thank you to everyone who's been watching these videos, whether this is your first video or your 100th. I appreciate all of y'all a lot, and I really can't believe my channel's growth over the last few months. Yes, it's because of the Arcane video, but so many of y'all stayed for SpongeBob, and that just makes me really happy. So thanks, y'all! During my last season overview, I talked about having hit the milestones of 1,000 and 2,000 subscribers, and during this season overview, I'm happy to say that I've crossed the threshold of 3,000. It's really astounding. Alright, now that's it. And without further ado, let me start talking about the episodes of Season 7. Here we are on tiermaker.com, home of tier lists, and home of this SpongeBob SquarePants Season 7 tier list maker, which is what I'll be using today to rank the episodes of Season 7. Like always, I've got my tiers on the left side here, and I'll be going in descending order, so starting with the best and ending with the worst. And I'll be starting with my favorite episode of this season, Earworm, which had come in with the rather dazzling score of 9.5 out of 10. Now, this episode was simply fantastic. I loved just about everything about it. It had that mix of horror and humor that I adore out of this show, although the balance is definitely much heavier on the humor side of things, which is certainly no problem at all for me. I also just think that this episode is hella relatable, given that I too experience earworms, and constantly as well. And seeing SpongeBob just lose his shit like this is always super fun and enjoyable. Like, I'm not sure if I've seen an example of this failing yet. Don't quote me on that. I'm not checking all of my episode reviews right now. But anyway, yes, I love this episode a lot, and it deserves this highest praise as my best of the season. Second best will be going to Perfect Chemistry, which had come in with a score of 9.4 out of 10. The final episode of Season 7, and also perhaps its most positively received one, Perfect Chemistry features the refreshing and excellent duo of Plankton and Sandy, who are shown to be two sides of the same coin, in a way at least, during this episode's runtime, which I think is an excellent thing for both of their characters. This episode is also surprisingly funny, given how reliant it can be on bathroom humor at times, and although the beginning is a little slow, the rest of the episode more than makes up for it by being just so enjoyable and fun to watch, not a complaint to be found. For third best of the season, that's going to be the likely surprising choice of Rodeo Days, which had also come in with a score of 9.4 out of 10. Let me just say now, get ready for a lot of ties in this tier. Okay, well, anyway, Rodeo Days was just a whole lot of fun, and it was Sandy focused, which is a win in my books. I also just love the way that the Western theme is utilized in this episode, and I love how committed SpongeBob is to saving Sandy, which is exactly what I like to see. We love strong friendships. I love the sense of action and adventure in this episode, and even if things end abruptly, I really like the ending too. Next up, coming in fourth place for Season 7, that honor is gonna go to Greasy Buffoons, which, surprise surprise, had a score of 9.4 out of 10. This episode was a really fun and downright silly watch. The humor here is really, really good, with one of my favorite jokes of Squidward disappearing after hearing more work with no extra pay. There's a certain gross factor in this episode, but it's not the kind of gross that makes you want to turn the episode off. And Plankton and Mr. Krabs' dynamic here is entertaining. Also, SpongeBob gets to stand up for himself, or really for Patrick and the rest of Bikini Bottom here. We love to see it. And then for number 5 in my top 5 episodes of this season, in what might come as a surprise to many given its content, that honor is going to Tunnel of Glove, which, you guessed it, had a score of 9.4 out of 10. Yes, we all know that one of the big battles waged on this channel is Pugs versus amatonormativity, and on the surface this episode seems to be all about normalizing that amatus, but actually it reads more of a critique, of the idea that a boy and girl that are friends must be romantically interested in each other, which is good for multiple reasons, not the least of which being that Pearl is a teenager and SpongeBob is an adult. Outside of this great handling of a plot that may give a second concern look to, Tunnel of Glove features excellent comedy and a very entertaining side plot in the form of Patrick trying to rescue SpongeBob, which funnily enough portrays their friendship in a much better way than that of this episode's sister, which will remain a mystery to those who do not know it or have not watched my review of this episode pair. Alright, so that's the top 5 of this season. Let's talk about the rest of this amazing tier. Since there was an awe-inspiring 22 episodes in this tier this season, and since we've got 5 down, we've got 17 more to go. Oh boy. The first of these is gonna be Growth Spout, which came in with a score of 9.4 out of 10. Yes, I really loved that rating this season, but trust me, you haven't seen anything yet. This is the last episode with this score. And as you might expect, this is a really great episode. It's especially a really great episode for Mr. Krabs as a character. I mean, the episode is certainly funny and enjoyable, but a really good chunk of my enjoyment comes from the way this episode balances Mr. Krabs being a great father with him being a cheap-ass man. Easily the best showing of these two aspects combined in an episode so far. And even though the plot is technically repetitive, it never feels that way, and that's all thanks to the humor and the characters utilized. The reason why this episode just barely misses the mark of being in my top 5 has less to do with any problems inherent with this episode, but more because the other episodes just held that extra edge. With Tunnel of Glove specifically, the way it completely exceeded my expectations just made me very happy in a way that this episode kind of did, showing Mr. Krabs being a good dad, but not to the same degree. So this episode is amazing, but it's not top 5. So, the next 8 episodes all came in with a score of 9.3 out of 10. Yeah, I was really just handing out some of these like candy. So all of these episodes are essentially the same quality, which made ranking them quite the debacle. Almost had to use one of those head-to-head websites. The first episode I'll be ranking to come in with this score of 9.3 out of 10 is The Great Patty Caper. I just love this one, man, and I think it's simply an excellent special episode, which I know is a rather unpopular opinion, but listen, it's like this episode was made for me, the mystery, the train, the red herrings, the really great jokes and gags, just a masterful episode. Subverts expectations even more than The Last Jedi, which yes, I know that's a joke I made in the review of that episode, but I think I'm allowed to make it again. But real talk, that review is one of my favorites in terms of the script, so you should watch it if you haven't already. After that, the next episode with a 9.3 out of 10 is gonna be The Scent of Money. This episode contains many, many great interactions and dynamics between every combination of SpongeBob, Gary, and Mr. Krabs, and this is something that I love, because I love seeing SpongeBob and Gary, I love seeing SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs, and I love when the show utilizes new character dynamics like Gary and Mr. Krabs. And I especially love SpongeBob in this episode. His character is great here, and I'm glad to see him stand up for what's right. Up next will be I Heart Dancing. I don't think I need to say what score this had, right? Okay, well, I make it a habit to say the score, so I guess I should say that this episode had a score of 9.3 out of 10. This is a simply, really great episode. Hilarious, fun. Squidward is really enjoyable here because we get to revel in him being an asshole and getting all the comeuppance that he deserves. And who could forget the ever-iconic, "Who put you on the planet? Ugh." For the 4th episode in this 8-way tie for episodes with a 9.3 out of 10, that's gonna be Cracked Crabs. This is an excellent episode for the SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs dynamic, especially for me who loves my Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob father-son crumbs. This episode is funny, and it's really helped by being in a new location that allows the dynamic between SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs to really shine, and the banter between these characters, or the new characters, is similarly golden. There is a slight moment of secondhand embarrassment in this episode, but it's resolved quickly, and the rest of the episode more than makes up for it. Fifth in the 8-way tie of episodes with a 9.3 out of 10 is gonna be Sponge Kano. I really love this episode. It's just a whole lot of fun and has a rather engaging story that I must admit. And it's also hilarious as well. And includes one of my favorite tracks in the show, which perhaps unfairly elevates it. Well, who cares if it's fair? It's still my opinion, and what I say goes on this channel. Sixth in this tie for 9.3 out of 10 is gonna be Model Sponge, which is... Wait a minute. There we go. Okay. This great episode plays around with the fact that SpongeBob is a sponge, a kitchen sponge, and that is beautiful. SpongeBob's characterization in this episode is honestly really good. Two aspects of his character that I find to be written poorly at times, his ego and his insecurity, are done very well here, and work to make his character decently nuanced for a SpongeBob episode, and they help to drive the plot. The episode even makes use of a trope that I don't even like, a character mishearing another character and taking the wrong idea from it, and I didn't even bat an eye because it was done that well. We love to see it. And seventh in this 8-way tie for 9.3 out of 10 is gonna be Keep Bikini Bottom Beautiful. This is a very enjoyable episode with some great banter between the characters and a surprisingly hilarious running gag with the cop, and it was also nice to see Squilliam again here since this is his last, actually important appearance. And last, but certainly not least, in this 8-way tie for episodes with a score of 9.3 out of 10 is Krusty Dogs. A classic Krusty Krab business practices plot. What I really like about Krusty Dogs is just how freaking funny it is and how it features SpongeBob and Squidward working together against Mr. Krabs and even the Krusty Krab itself while being entirely on the same page. That's not something we see very often, and seeing SpongeBob be this determined to see to the failure of this new menu option is downright novel, if you don't count the Krusty Sponge at least, or even the Krabby Chronicle in a way. If you thought we were done with the ridiculous ties, you were wrong, because 6 episodes came in with the score of 9.2 out of 10. Yes, I hate myself too. The first of these 9.2 out of 10s is gonna be Squidward in Clarinet Land. To the surprise of no one, I absolutely adore the utterly bizarre nature of this episode, and this episode has layers to it since when you think about it, as someone on the SpongeBob wiki had pointed out, Squidward's whole experience seems to be an anxiety dream caused by his nervousness for his upcoming audition. Pretty neat for a show like SpongeBob SquarePants. But also, this episode is just enjoyable and fun, though for me it is of course very much carried by the very strange and peculiar vibes it gives off, and that's just the honest truth. Up next in this 6-way tie for the 9.2 out of 10s is going to be the very first episode of this season, Tentacle Vision. This is an amusing episode with a fun plot. I liked the idea of Squidward being on TV. Humor wasn't the best, but there were still many great jokes to be found here. I really liked the inclusion of a lot of the main cast in this episode as well, even if most were in cameo form. Third in this tie for the 9.2 out of 10s is going to be The Curse of the Hex. This fun episode is especially great from a humor and character perspective, with some rapid-fire humor and some great interactions between SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs, as well as some excellent quips from Squidward. This episode has just about all I could really want from a SpongeBob SquarePants episode. Sure, we could have gotten more Madam Hagfish, but that could have disrupted the nice balance of the episode, so I'm happy with this. Oh, I just realized these are not going in the amazing tier. Whoops. Oh my gosh. Okay, fix that. Moving right along down this list of episodes with a 9.2 out of 10, the next ranked is gonna be The Main Drain. An almost speculative episode, The Main Drain is just another great little adventure. I like that there's foreshadowing used in this episode. It makes it more engaging since it makes you think, and although this episode's twist is predictable, for at least the first twist, it's still plenty enjoyable. Next up, also of course with a 9.2 out of 10, is The Monster Who Came to Bikini Bottom. This episode is surprising in that it's a Patrick-led adventure that I really enjoyed, and the reason this episode works is because it does what I've been saying this whole time, give Patrick a good supporting character to bounce off of in episodes about him. Rarg might not have a lot of what you'd call a characterization, but he's got more than enough to have a good dynamic with Patrick and later SpongeBob. I just really enjoy this one, it's fun. And then lastly, in this big old tie for the 9.2 out of 10s is Shellback Shenanigans. If I can find it. There we go. Lily could not read that title card. Gary focused, kind of, fun and enjoyable. Shellback Shenanigans is just a really good episode that I found myself having a lot of fun with. Sure, it's not as Gary focused as I was hoping, but seeing the best iteration of this Plankton pretending to be someone else shtick that this season had going more than made up for that, because this episode was just really freaking funny. Not to mention that Gary saves the day, which is just an absolute win. Seriously, it's like this episode took the faults of episodes like Someone's in the Kitchen with Sandy and A Pal for Gary and improved upon them tenfold. It's lovely. Thankfully, that's going to be the last of the absurdly large ties in this tier list. We've got 3 more episodes for this amazing tier, 2 with a 9.1 out of 10 and 1 with a 9 out of 10. And so to start things off with a score of 9.1 out of 10, we've got The Play's the Thing. This episode was surprisingly great, given how often I hear people call it boring. That wasn't the case for me. I was very much engaged when watching this episode. I thought it was funny and amusing. Maybe it was all the melodrama, one of my favorite things to see in this show. Maybe it was the fact that it was so reminiscent, but not a ripoff of, Culture Shock. Who knows? I just really liked it. And then the other episode with a score of 9.1 out of 10 this season is Welcome to the Bikini Bottom Triangle. There you are. I really like the mystery aspect of this episode. It's something that keeps me engaged while watching. Another thing that keeps me engaged is that this episode utilizes Pearl for once, which is something that this show does not do very often. And they utilize her well. As it turns out, she kind of saves the day. Kind of, at least. This episode contains many great jokes as well, and it's just an enjoyable venture. Not much to say about it. And so for our final episode of the amazing tier, coming into a score of 9 out of 10, we've got Whelk Attack. And this is just another really fun episode, as is par for the course when it comes to the amazing tier. The pacing of this episode really stands out to me, although there was one joke that did serve to undermine that great pacing, which is one of the reasons why this episode is low on the amazing tier. But outside of that, the jokes in this episode are pretty good, and the kind of adventure of it all is just really enjoyable. Not much else to say. Now that we've gone through all 22 episodes of the amazing tier, it's time to rank the 12 episodes that found themselves in the great tier. The first of these is gonna be That Sinking Feeling, which had come in with a score of 8.9 out of 10. This is a great episode for watching the Conch Street trio at play. The dynamics between these three are really strong in this episode, and they definitely carry a plot that might have been boring otherwise. But then again, this is SpongeBob SquarePants, it knows how to do simple plots effectively, and this episode is proof of it. The only reason why this episode is down here in the great tier instead of the amazing tier is a couple of slow moments that drag things down, but the point is this episode is still an excellent watch. And then next is gonna be The Wreck of the Mauna Loa. There you are. Which also came in with a score of 8.9 out of 10. This episode is just very fun with a nice helping of being really cute. SpongeBob and Patrick might lean on the child side of the child-adult line for much of this episode, but the way in which this is done is charming and enjoyable and in some ways reminds me of midlife crustacean. That's not a connection I made in my review of the episode, regrettably, but it is a connection that I can make now. And this episode is a great showcase of Mr. Krabs' pirate side and his greed, and even better is seeing him get his just desserts. Moving right along is the only episode to have a score of 8.8 this season, or 8.8 out of 10 this season, and that is Back to the Past. This was a fun episode that was a pleasant surprise, given that I usually don't like time travel plots in cartoons like this, but I thought this episode played with it well enough. Where this episode really shines is in being the comic book parody that it is, complete with the very relevant guest stars of Adam West and Burt Ward. This episode's biggest weakness is Patrick, who is entirely unhelpful during the 16 minutes this episode encompasses, but it's not as bad as it could be. Cough, cough, stuck in the ringer, cough. Up next is an episode that is also the only one of its score, and that's The Curse of Bikini Bottom, which had the unique score of 8.7 out of 10. This is a fun episode about SpongeBob and Patrick being ghosts, even if this concept is not played around with as much as I would have liked. Had many funny moments, though it wasn't the funniest episode. And it was also rather morbid, but in a way where you gotta think about it and it becomes morbid, not outwardly so. And the Flying Dutchman is always a win in my books, even if his appearance here is somewhat minor. And after that episode is gonna be The Masterpiece, which came in with a score of 8.6 out of 10. This is a surprisingly great episode. Well, I shouldn't say surprisingly, because that implies that I thought it was going to be bad. I more mean that no one talks about this episode, and the topic isn't immediately enthralling, but this episode shows the crew's adeptness at taking basic plots and creating great episodes out of them. I really like the dynamic between the crusty crew here, and although the humor isn't the best and there's a couple of meh moments, hence this episode being in this tier, I still really like it. Next is gonna be the abrasive side, which I'd given a score of 8.5 out of 10. This is one of those episodes that's got some really great shit and some kinda not that good shit mixing together to bring this episode to this middle ground of a score, because everything involving the actual abrasive side itself is hilarious and cathartic. And I say cathartic because the first few minutes of this episode where SpongeBob can't say no to anyone and it kinda ruins his day are a bit irritating to various degrees. And while that beginning of the episode was necessary to the execution of the rest of it, that doesn't make it any easier to watch in the moment, you know? Up next will be the other episode to come in with an 8.5 out of 10, The Inside Job. This is a fun, simple plankton plot kind of episode. The way SpongeBob's senses are played around with in this episode was amusing, and the environment of the inside of SpongeBob's head was neat to look at. This episode contains some moments of minor annoyance, like Karen blaming Plankton at the end when for once that isn't the case, but overall the episode remains enjoyable. It is largely kept out of the amazing tier because it isn't super funny, but it is still a good watch. And then there's 3 episodes that found themselves coming in with a score of 8.4 out of 10. This is probably the last more than two-way tie. So the first of these is going to be A Day Without Tears. This is a surprisingly good episode. I say surprising because an episode all about SpongeBob crying does not sound like the most enjoyable plot in the world, but it really is. I mean, yes, the beginning of this episode does contain some annoying crying, but thankfully this episode moves beyond that, which helps. This episode is funny and simply fun, and the meta nature of it is a nice bonus. After that is gonna be New Fish in Town, which of course had that 8.4 out of 10 score. This was a nice, rather simple episode of Squidward trying to latch onto whatever normalcy he can find living on Conch Street. New Fish in Town harkens all the way back to Opposite Day, with Squidward's palpable desperation being wonderfully and dramatically shown. And the new character in this episode, while he's much of a blank slate, is still fun to watch in his interactions with Squidward. In general, this episode is not super funny, which is one of the driving forces behind it being in this tier, but that one running gag of the elaborate cliff diving was great. And then lastly, for these episodes with an 8.4 out of 10, we've got Enchanted Tiki Dreams. This episode begins just a bit rough, with Squidward having a pretty shit day. Now, when I say rough, I more mean that it's not super interesting, and then there's some moments that are a bit difficult to watch, like Squidward breaking down in tears. However, those difficult to watch moments do help the episode out when it turns into the wholesome endeavor of SpongeBob and Patrick trying to give Squidward a place where he can relax. And so when that happens, this episode becomes really fun and, well, relaxing. And it just makes me feel, like, warm inside to see SpongeBob and Patrick go this far for their neighbor. Going down the list, next is gonna be Buried in Time, which had a score of 8.3 out of 10. There we go. This episode is pretty good. I don't really have a lot of thoughts about it because I find it to be a very standard episode, I suppose. But I mean, the standard of SpongeBob SquarePants is rather high, hence this episode being in this tier. But I generally found this one to be enjoyable. I thought the plot was neat, if perhaps somewhat underwhelming, and one little thing I really enjoyed about this episode was the details in the shot of the tartar sauce can in the beginning of the episode. Lots of little things for me to love in that one. And then finishing off the great tier is Gary in Love, which came in with a solid 8 out of 10. Despite the fact that this episode contains a lot of heteronormative, amatonormative nonsense, I actually really enjoyed it. It was an entertaining episode, and especially SpongeBob here was great. The Gary focus was also a bonus, and the last bit of the episode, especially with the triple pursuit, was very, very fun, which helped things out a whole bunch. With the great tier taken care of, let's talk about the good tier. These are all episodes that I still, of course, like and find to be quality pieces of television. They're just, lacking something or other to make them truly great or amazing. There were just 4 episodes that made this tier, so we won't be here too long. And the first of these is gonna be Love That Squid, which had a score of 7.8 out of 10. Just like Tunnel of Glove, you might be surprised to see that I actually like Love That Squid. However, this episode is obviously a bit lower than that one, so maybe it isn't quite as surprising, as there's clearly things I didn't like about this episode as much. Although none of those things have to do with the romance of it all necessarily, just the utilization of some tropes that I don't quite like, and then of the episode completely skimping out on showing us the thing that we'd been working towards during much of its duration. But other than that, I enjoyed it, and I very much liked Squidward and SpongeBob's genuine camaraderie here. It's a nice change from their typical dynamic. Next up will be the Bad Guy Club for Villains, which had a score of 7.7 out of 10. This episode is a fun companion to Back to the Past, and a fun little Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy adventure. It's not a very funny episode, but the focus of this episode isn't the comedy anyway, but the action and enjoyable adventure, which I think it does pretty well. However, the heavy focus on Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy does detract from this episode a bit, since they aren't my favorite characters to follow, and the intrusions of SpongeBob and Patrick into the plot keep pulling me out of the immersion, which doesn't help. Following right along is gonna be SpongeBob's Last Stand, which came with a score of 7.6 out of 10. The thing about this episode is that it has a very curious focus. It's an environmental soapbox messaging episode, but rather than it being about the ocean, as you might expect, it's about ecosystems being destroyed due to car infrastructure. An equally valuable message, of course, but just very out of place for a show that takes place in the ocean. I might be the only person in the world to actually see this as an issue, but I just can't let it go. Other than that, this episode zigzags in quality, going from being enjoyable to emotional to annoying to boring and more. And in general, this episode has far more good qualities than bad, though, so hence its placement in this tier. And in some ways, this episode is rather accurate when it comes to organizing in the real world, so I had to give it some points for that accuracy. And then for the last episode of the good tier, that's going to be Trench Billies, which also had a score of 7.6 out of 10. This episode certainly isn't bad, but it's not the best. The designs kind of put me off, and a few writing decisions leave me scratching my head a bit, and there are times when things drag, but there are also times when this episode is funny and engaging. Honestly, what intrigues me most about this episode is the whole idea of it. Trench-living hillbillies. I want to know more? Kind of? I mean, I don't really want to see these guys again, but y'all know what I mean. After the good tier comes this little tier in green here, the okay tier. As you might expect, I consider these episodes to be just okay. There were 2 episodes in this tier, and probably shockingly, the first of them is going to be One Course Meal, which had come in with a score of 6.5 out of 10. Okay, put the pitchforks down. Yeah, one of the most infamous episodes in the show is in the okay tier, because I thought this episode was fine. I think the whole plot is a bit strange when it comes to Mr. Krabs using his daughter's image to scare Plankton, and I also think that Mr. Krabs was an asshole in this episode, but those are really my only problems. I like SpongeBob a lot here, and I find this episode to generally be enjoyable, maybe a bit on the duller side. If this episode had stuck the landing harder by giving Mr. Krabs more of the comeuppance that he deserves, this episode could have been in the good tier, but alas, that did not come to pass. And then the second episode to find itself in this tier was Grandma's Secret Recipe, which had come in with a 6 out of 10. This episode is, unfortunately, really boring. It also is one of too many episodes where Plankton gets in disguise to fool SpongeBob specifically. I also think that the plot is rather contrived, which can be fine, but this episode is just not entertaining enough for me to look past that. Well now, that was quick. The rest of these tiers are going to be flying by, let me just say that now, because now we're moving down to the mediocre tier, and this tier also only had 2 episodes grace its shores. Even better, I say with some sarcasm, is that the 2 episodes that found themselves in this tier came with the same score, 5.7 out of 10. And to start us off, I'll be putting Summer Job as the higher ranked of the 2. Although this is a Mrs. Puff episode, which is something that excites me, this episode squanders that potential by treating Mrs. Puff horribly and revealing that outside of a boating school context, she does not work as a butt monkey. This episode is just frustrating and annoying way too often, and I find the writing to be weak and disappointing. And the humor, while there are a couple jokes that work, is generally not very strong. The other episode in this tier was Karate Star, which of course was given a score of 5.7 out of 10. Karate Star low-key irritates me just on principle, being an episode about karate that doesn't feature or even mention Sandy in any way. But beyond that, the reason why this episode lands in this tier is that it's all about asshole Patrick, who in this episode is not entertaining until maybe the last little bit, when Patrick is actually remorseful for his actions. And we get an ending that reminds me of Spy Buddies, but before that, Patrick is smug and self-serving and flat-out annoying, not to mention that a good chunk of this episode follows him without any kind of supporting cast, which is usually a recipe for disaster. This episode isn't horrible, but it's not exactly good either, and so I find the writing to be mediocre. You know, I think this is the first time that the barely tolerable tier will be having its own section of the season overview video without being a part of the bottom 5. I can't tell if I should be amazed by that or not, but yeah. So another 2 episodes found themselves in this tier because I guess I couldn't let any episode face a tier alone this go around. With this tier, we begin to reach the episodes that I view negatively. The first episode here in the tolerable tier was Hide and Then What Happens, which I had given a score of 4.6 out of 10. This episode is just incredibly boring for so much of its runtime, taking entirely too long to get even remotely interesting, and when it does get interesting, well, I fear it's too little too late. But what really pushes this episode down into this tier instead of being mediocre or okay is the fact that not only is it boring, but it is also annoying. Not the most annoying this show has had to offer so far, but something about Patrick not knowing basic things just doesn't really tickle my fancy, putting it nicely. And then the other episode here in this tier is an episode I actually just reviewed, Big Sister Sam, which had a score of 4.4 out of 10. A rather notorious episode, Big Sister Sam is not as bad as it's been made out to be, but it's certainly not good either. During my review of this episode, which came out last week as of this video coming out, I was going back and forth as to whether this episode was just a failed execution of a kind of brushing aside of the bad actions of family members because they're family and seeing the consequences of that plot, or if it really wasn't trying to send a message and all of the elements of the episode related to that plot were incidental. I still can't tell which I believe more, though I lean more towards the former. No matter the case, this episode still consisted of Patrick being a jackass who didn't care about his sister hurting Squidward and SpongeBob and destroying their shit until way late in the episode, and although I really love SpongeBob in this episode, his great character can't save the way that he is unjustly punished for attempting to be a mediator, and how, with no clear lesson to be learned on the part of Patrick, Patrick feels unnecessarily hostile towards SpongeBob with no complimenting catharsis to go with it. So basically, it's I'm with stupid all over again. And so now, we have finally reached my bottom 5 episodes of Season 7. 2 episodes found themselves in the bad tier, and an utterly ludicrous 3 episodes were in the Abysmal tier. Mind you, that tier is very difficult to reach when it comes to this show, so for 3 episodes to reach it, more than doubling the amount that had been in there pre-Season 7, wow, just wow. So, to start things off, for number 5 of the bottom 5, we've got You Don't Know Sponge, which had been given a score of 3.8 out of 10. There was potential here in that it was an episode centered around SpongeBob and Patrick's friendship, which is an idea I like in principle. Not just that, but I could see how this episode seemingly wanted to be one of those ones that highlighted SpongeBob's paranoia and insecurity, something that makes him very different from Patrick, who is the opposite of SpongeBob's overthinker self. But the plot failed by making Patrick a legitimately shit friend, and by making the plot itself a bit inconsistent and perhaps incoherent. Outside of these writing issues, this episode is just not a very pleasant watch between Patrick's jackassery and it being kind of really boring, with only a couple of good jokes few and far in between. Very disappointing stuff. Coming in at number 4 in the bottom 5 is going to be Yours, Mine, and Mine. which had a score of 3.5 out of 10. Yeah, so this episode was annoying as fuck. It just was. And when it wasn't annoying, it was boring. The fact that Bill Fagerbaki voice acts Patrick's assholeness to this level of perfection is both a curse and a boon, because it just makes Patrick so much more infuriating, even if it proves that the man is a master of his craft. Sandy's appearance here is wasted, and in a season where her appearances are largely haphazard, that's a great offense. Moving right on down to number 3 of the bottom 5, we've got our first entry in the Abysmal tier, and that is going to be Someone's in the Kitchen with Sandy, which had a score of 1.5 out of 10. This episode is an immensely frustrating watch. Sandy does nothing wrong for the entirety of the episode. It has not only made the butt monkey for a series of not even approaching funny jokes, but also ultimately gets arrested at the end of the episode for something that isn't her fault. There are also times when this episode is nonsensical and not in a good way. And the fact that there is really a scene of Plankton being in Sandy's shower without her knowing is fucking weird. It's just weird. As for number 2 at the bottom 5, or my second least favorite episode of this season, well, that's gotta go to the one, the only, A Pal for Gary. Perhaps it may come as a surprise that an episode this infamous, especially one infamous for its treatment of Gary the Snail of all characters, is not my least favorite episode in the show, or at least of season 7. Well, I acknowledge your shock. However, don't worry, I most certainly do not like this episode. A Pal for Gary is frustrating and nonsensical, and worst of all, it had so much potential that creating a better storyline with it feels so easy that it's offensive. I'm not sure why making SpongeBob this horrible and oblivious asshole was the direction that this episode went in, but I wish it hadn't, because it was a mistake that cost this episode greatly. Just not good, and I don't even know where the logic was and why. And then, for the very last episode here on the list, for number 1 of the bottom 5, for my worst, or my most disliked episode of season 7, we've got none other than Stuck in the Ringer, which came in with the astounding score of 0 out of 10, marking it as not only my least favorite episode of season 7, but my least favorite episode of the entire show. In fact, let's just go with the flip side description. It's my most hated episode of this show, and I do indeed hate it. This is an awful, awful episode. Not even one iota of a redeeming quality about it. It is frustrating beyond all belief, and it is a mockery of good writing at just about every turn. I hated this episode so much that I had bonus rants about it. My review of this episode is incredibly long, and so is this. And so this little blurb will not be, for I've said all that can be said about this fucking mess at that time. Just know that I will never watch this episode of my own volition, and it deserves nothing more than to fall into obscurity. And with that, the tier list for season 7 is now complete. Why don't I get on over to the part where I discuss the average episode rating, and then season 7 as a whole. Like I always do, now that the tier list has been made, it's time to discuss the average episode rating of this season. And like I always say, this average rating doesn't particularly mean anything. You can't really compare seasons like that, but it's still an interesting number to have. And so for season 7, the average episode rating was an 8.1 out of 10. Bet that's a bit higher than you were expecting for such an infamous season, right? That's higher than the average episode ratings of seasons 4, 5, and 6. That doesn't necessarily mean I like season 7 more than those seasons, but it means it's got more higher rated episodes than those seasons, which is true. I mean, 22 amazing tier episodes is pretty astounding, so all in all, I think this average rating provides an indicator of the deconstruction of season 7's infamous reputation that is to come. And I think this marks a great transition point to talking about season 7 as a whole, don't you think? So let's chat. I mean, I guess the first thing I can say is that the way my opinion on season 7 changed pre-reviewing every episode compared to post-reviewing every episode has probably been my biggest opinion overhaul in this entire reviewing project. Even after reviewing all the way through season 13 on the forum, I believe that this is still the case. Because like so many others, I used to dislike this season, thinking it was the worst season of this show. And it's funny because 7 is my favorite number, so that always hurt my heart. But now I recognize that I was wrong. I suppose I could be kinder and say that my opinions have changed, but it's less that I changed my mind and more that I actually gave every episode a fair chance. Because that's the biggest problem facing these middle seasons of the show, seasons 6, 7, 8, and 9A to an extent. People do not give them their fair chance. And that is why I find so many hidden gems in these seasons, because by latching on to popular opinion without ever watching the episodes, or watching the episodes with a preconceived opinion in mind, people miss all of the good that's here. And season 7 has a lot of good, a lot more good than I ever expected. And so it's very easy for me to say that my favorite number is saved now because season 7 is nowhere near the level of my least favorite season of the show, which as of today is season 6. And just to remind everyone, I still thought that season 6 was a good season, so when I speak of it throughout this review and throughout my episode reviews, I'm largely speaking of it comparatively towards the other seasons or whatever I'm talking about at the moment. So, what is it that has fortified Season 7 against this test of time, made it such a clear improvement over, at the very least, Season 6? Well, for starters, this season is not boring. If you may recall, Season 6 was an incredibly boring one for me, and you might remember me saying at the end of my Season 6 overview that Season 7 will need to start melting that metaphorical glacier that was Season 6. Slow, cold, playing it a bit too safely, if it was to be an improvement. In my opinion, that is exactly what Season 7 did. In fact, Season 7 improved on almost every problem area of Season 6 that I'd outlined in that video, making this season feel like one largely the result of learning from some previous mistakes. For example, one of the biggest drags of Season 6 was its reliance on what I like to call awkward humor. Season 6 kept trying it and it wasn't working. Season 7, on the other hand, was able to use it well, and notably it did so much more sparingly than Season 6 did. This, I think, makes me more convinced in what I'd been saying about how the awkward humor was kind of an experiment, for in Season 7, it feels much more honed than it did previously. Season 7 also finally did something about the character dynamic problem that was present in Season 6. As I'd said in my review of that season, Season 6 kept using the same characters in the same dynamics and it was growing frighteningly close to stale, but Season 7 managed to break out of that trap in most ways. With the elevated role of Plankton, we saw him be involved in some new interactions, such as finally interacting solidly with Sandy in perfect chemistry, and a little bit with Gary and Shellback shenanigans. Inside Jobs showed new sides to Plankton's character, artificial sides, but sides nonetheless, which I think managed much of the same effect. Additionally, this season took some existing character dynamics and played with them, such as in Cracked Crabs, A Day Without Tears, or the abrasive side. This is all a breath of fresh air compared to what we've been seeing as of late. However, Season 7 did fail to involve a lot of characters like Mrs. Puff, Pearl, Karen, or most egregiously Sandy, so that was one issue that this show had yet to learn from at this point in time. And then in general, the quality of the episodes in this season was just much higher on average than what we've been seeing as of late. Yes, it's true that Season 7 had some real garbage episodes, but there was so much good stuff, as I've already made quite clear. This season had 49 segments, so it was a long one, but still, 22 amazing tier episodes is nothing to sneeze at. And now, let me switch gears for a bit to talk about what didn't work quite so well during Season 7. My biggest problem with this season is one that has, unfortunately, been a long time coming, and that is the deterioration of the writing for SpongeBob and Patrick's friendship. I really do not know what's going on here, but we've been seeing fewer and fewer great episodes about these two's friendship. I didn't even like The Secret Box all that much, but I'd take a million of those over Yours, Mine, and Mine, or Hide and Then What Happens, or Big Sister Sam, or You Don't Know Sponge, or God forbid, Stuck in the Ringer. I truly have no clue what we're supposed to enjoy about Patrick being SpongeBob's worst friend, and it's a detriment to both of their characters. Can we return to Patrick Smartpants or the Battle of Bikini Bottom, please? Like, now? Hell, this season, despite having this problem in general, had a few really great depictions of their friendship in Tunnel of Glove, Model Sponge, and The Great Patty Caper. In other words, in episodes that aren't primarily about their friendship. To me, this means that it's this attempt at manufacturing a conflict for the best friends that's failing, and they keep falling back on Patrick being a piece of shit and throwing good writing out of the window, and it needs to stop. Another one of the biggest problems of this season is this trend of like unfair punishment, I guess. I'm thinking of episodes like Stuck in the Ringer, A Pal for Gary, Big Sister Sam, Summer Job, hell even You Don't Know Sponge or One Course Meal, in a way. It's either characters that need consequences not getting them, or more often not getting enough of them, or it's characters that don't need punishment getting punished anyway. I'm not sure where this trend has come from, but I'm gonna need it to stop because it is frustrating and unpleasant. And there is a difference between treating a character like a butt monkey, like Squidward usually is, and just hounding on them for no reason and acting like this is reasonable. I don't like it. Although season 7 had such dizzying heights, it also had some rather appalling lows. Like, I'm not gonna beat around the bush here, this season had some real pieces of garbage. This season had my least favorite episode in the entire show, Stuck in the Ringer, and I don't think I need to say anything else to make it clear that I loathe that episode. One of the reasons for this is related to what I just said earlier, though in this case it's specifically because of the trend of bikini bottomites being pieces of trash. Comedy born of frustration doesn't work. The sooner we learn this, the sooner I don't have to keep handing out abysmals and bads. However, while it is true season 7 had some real stinkers, I still stand by my assertion that this season is way overhated, and that is because it contains some episodes that are overhated themselves. Most notably on this list is One Course Meal. Other episodes fitting this bill are A Day Without Tears and Big Sister Sam. The way people talk about this season and these episodes, you'd think they were the second coming of Satan, and it just isn't that serious for me. Yes, I can be dramatic, but that's mostly just me having fun and adding melodrama to my reviews. But people in the past have been entirely serious about their hatred for these episodes and all who were involved with them, and that's just doing too much. There's so much negativity about this season, which overlooks that, in my opinion at least, this is the strongest season of the show since season 5, maybe even season 4. As a cohesive product, I think season 7 is on par with season 4, or maybe slightly below it, same with season 5. And I just think it's important to note that while I love season 7, I love it in a way that's different from the other seasons. Or it's different from the way that I love other seasons. Not in any lesser way, just different. Just like how the show is different than it used to be, but that doesn't make it worse. To me. I know people have different opinions about that. Alright, bringing things together now, it's time to give Season 7 a name. Like I said earlier, I felt that Season 7 had risen to the challenge I gave it after reviewing Season 6, the Glacial Season. And as such, I've decided to call Season 7 the Refined Season. For one thing, as I've been saying this whole time, this season took a lot of the problems that have been plaguing the previous ones and improved upon them, such as in the use of awkward humor or in character dynamics. Also, in animation. I also think that in general, Season 7 is quite the improvement over the previous and shows some real sharpness and wit that this show has been lacking for some time now. Yes, I'm aware that this is a woefully unpopular opinion, but that's just how it's gonna have to be, because to me, Season 7 is a great season. The question is, as we reach the final season of this infamous run of the show, will Season 8 continue this emerging trend of greatness, or are we dipping back down into the depths? Let's check back in on that in a few months, how about that? As always, I'm going to be ending this video of closing thoughts on my closing thoughts. I can't believe Season 7 is done and over with. It feels like I'm blasting through this show, even though I'm really just like halfway through. I'm approximating there. I haven't done any calculations to see if I'm actually halfway through. No, but seriously, thank you to all of you watching today and to everyone who has been supporting this channel in any way, shape, or form. It's unreal how this channel has grown. And speaking of that, the Q&A video should be out in about a week. As I write and record this script, I literally do not have Wi-Fi, and I won't have Wi-Fi until I move to my new place, so it might get a little wonky. I'm just hoping that this video will come out on time. Such is life, I suppose. But really, I'm not sure what else to say about Season 7. I think maybe I've said all that there is to say, which means maybe it's time to bring this video to a close? And so now I'll end the video here, and I'll see y'all when I begin to review Season 8.